thank you for coming tonight. We're so glad to have you. Looks like you're all seated and ready to play. My name is Linda McCarthy. I've had the distinct pleasure of being the local staff person on this project, which has been a very exciting and rewarding and very good learning experience for me. And I welcome you here on behalf of the Downtown Business Improvement District. This is workshop number 3 of the Downtown Master Plan process. I'd like to introduce you to the BID Board of Directors. They are the organization that has taken the lead on this project and signed on to bring Crandall Arambula here. So I'm going to introduce you, and please stand. Charlie Beaton, Big Dipper Ice Cream. Ellen Buchanan, Missoula Redevelopment Agency. Dan Cedarberg, Cedarberg Law. Karma Gilligan. Ginny Iverson, St. Patrick's Hospital. Newcomer Alan Newell, he's with the Historical Research Associates. Chairman Tim France, Warden's Market. And I'd like to introduce you to staff member Rod Austin, who is the new Director of Operations. Here he is over here. And obviously, on behalf of all of those individuals, we're delighted to have you here. And we appreciate you taking the time to come help shape the future of our downtown Missoula. And I say our downtown Missoula because really it does belong to all of us. And it is a very cherished and important part of our community. So a couple things to get out of the way. You will be here until 9 o'clock unless you have to leave early, but we are planned to be here till 9. Please be respectful of other people's ideas, issues, and concerns. Please be sure that you've signed in because we want to make sure that we've got you on our list and we're getting information out to you. And we want to keep you in the loop on this process. And before the end of the night, please be sure to fill out the response sheets that are either on your table or will be on your table in the near future. And remember that you can follow this process through the Downtown Business Improvement District website. And I know you won't remember it, but it's MissoulaDowntownBID.org. And if you need any help with that, let me know. So we get asked a lot, why are we planning? Why do we need a plan? We need to lay out the future of downtown Missoula. We need to provide direction for positive change. We want to indicate how much and what kind of development is appropriate. We want to provide reasonable certainty and predictability for potential investors. We want to provide guidance for day-to-day decisions by government officials and nonprofit organizations. We want to provide better visual definition of our downtown. We want to help our citizens understand proposed changes, put them into context, help them understand how it impacts them. And we want to define obligations for government officials and those who lead in decision making. So this process officially began in January of this year. Crandall Arambula, a professional consulting firm from Portland, Oregon, was selected from a pool of 36 firms that submitted proposals in response to the RFP. They have been to Missoula several times this year, and they have held a number of stakeholder meetings and public workshops. They were last here in May. They were also here in March and in January. They've met with more than 1,200 individuals during their visits here, and this trip has them scheduled for 19 meetings in 48 hours. That's quite amazing. And our goal is to have the final plan to present to the City Council and the Planning Board, hopefully in November. So all of this that we've gone through, we've done in one calendar year. So head of our consulting team, and I'm going to ask you to stand, is George Crandall, Don Arambula, Jason Graff. There you are, he's in the back of the room. Sub-consultants joining them this evening are Brent Campbell of WGM Group. Brent, where are you? Okay, there you are. He's focusing on transportation and infrastructure. WGM is here in Missoula. Tom Moriarty of Economic Research Associate in Washington, D.C. He's focusing on retail and business development. And other consultants involved with this project, but who are not here tonight, include Lorraine Roach of the Hingston Roach Group. She's focusing on employment and tourism strategies. Dennis Burns of Carl Walker. He was here 3 weeks ago talking about parking. Obviously, that's a big focus. Mike Robertson, also of Carl Walker, and focusing on parking. So we have an amazing team of folks who've been really good at addressing every email, every phone call, every visit. They've been very responsive. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to George Crandall and Don Arambula.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for coming out tonight. Our computer is doing a little bit of a flick on and off, and so we may be changing computers halfway through. Don's warming up his computer now, but away we go. And here we are, and the project purpose is summarized here. And the study area within the red line. And the context, the downtown, of course, and in the surrounding area. The meeting purpose tonight, then, is to look at plan refinements and get your thinking about those refinements. And the agenda is pretty straightforward, the presentation and then the discussion. And and the discussion, I think, is the most interesting part of the meeting, and we will then have you fill out response sheets and then make table reports as you'd done before. A reminder, the planning process, 3 steps, 1 through 3, starting, designing, implementing, going from the general to the very specific. And when we look at the schedule, then it's summarized here, and here we are tonight looking at plan refinements. There will be one more meeting at some time in November, and we'll be talking about the master plan, the final master plan, and the implementation strategy. And so our team has been introduced to you, the Grand Larambula, we're the green arrows, and all the people that Linda talked about, they are the yellow arrows. So we're assisted by lots of very talented people. Our firm is out of Portland, Oregon. We're a small firm, and this is what we do, and this is our specialty. We work around the country. We get good reviews and bad reviews, and we only save the good ones, and here they are. And so we've learned. We've had successes and we've had failures. And on the left, a before and an after parking lot to public square, and a waterfront that had a roadway, which is now a waterfront park. Meeting 1, the reminder. Back in March, the question was, and many of you attended, what are your issues and concerns? Those issues and concerns are driving the process. And for example, 70 people said maintain and expand a mix of retail. 41 said the next one, and you can see. So this informed us about what it was you wanted us to address, and that has been driving the planning process forward. And then you can see some circulation alternatives, circulation issues as well. And it doesn't mean that this prioritized the objectives. The ones with the most time mentioned are important, of course. Everything was important, and we're trying to address everything you mentioned. Meeting 2 then was in May. At that time, we said, here's some alternatives. And we said, what about a retail hotspot? And you filled out your response sheet, and you can see 186 yes, 3 no. And how about open space? The Depot Square Roundhouse Park, as we called it, again, a positive response. Festival waterfront, and a positive response as well. Now, the reason these become important is that we want to know what everyone is thinking in the session. And if something gets a negative vote, we take it off the table. Or if it's a 50-50, we know that maybe it ought to come off the table, or we need to do more work on it. So this informs us about where you are, because in the end, it's your plan. As far as housing in the downtown, a neighborhood protection zone, again, positive. Rail yard housing, if the rail yard should redevelop at some time in the future, again, positive. That seems like a stretch, but there it is. Triangle housing, and of course, you've been looking at the triangle for some time, and lots of good concepts, but we had some refinements. You said yes on that. West Broadway housing, again, a positive vote. And by the way, when we get a no, we take a look at the no's, and we also look at comments, because those sheets have places for comments. And so you've informed us about many issues, or some of you had other suggestions, and we try and incorporate those. So we take these very seriously. As far as employment, the employment The Triangle Employment Anchor, you said yes, it's up by the hospital. On the East Madison Employment Anchor, again, a positive response, employment on the west, and employment on the in the middle of the government center, the consolidation of county and city functions. There was a positive response for that. As far as the cultural campus, we said perhaps there's a place for the Performing Arts Center down by the library off in front, and other cultural activities, and that received a positive response as well. But you had some questions about that. Higgins and Broadway Bikeway basically had a positive response, as well as the Higgins did, as well as Broadway. So we carried those forward. We suggested a streetcar at a later phase, and where that might run, that is a streetcar on rails in the street in a fixed alignment, running with traffic, in traffic, and generally you said yes. There were some doubters, so got many no's as well, but this is a long-term strategy, and certainly since we've begun, energy costs have gone up, and it's starting to look even better. As far as streetcar phase 2 running to the university, again, not a lot of enthusiasm, but it received a positive vote. Main two-way from one-way, certainly very positive, and front two-way from one-way, again, very positive. And you have been talking about making them two-way for some time in the community, and this was just an affirmation of that. So here we are then at meeting number 3 with the refinements. We've taken your responses, your comments, had discussions, other discussions with your steering committee, technical advisory committee, and with your leadership, and out of that have come these refinements. And so, Don, do you want to talk about these refined alternatives? So we're going to switch on and off to keep you awake here.
Okay.
Don.
First of our tag team efforts here. So I'm going to start it out and do, 30, 40 slides and give it back to George. So you should have this on your table. We call it the capacity diagram. So what we did is take a look at this and assemble all the projects, do a little bit more refinement from the last meeting. This is helpful because it helps us, one, test some of the growth projections with past transportation plans. You're doing a regional growth scenario right now. How does this match up with that? And it helps us take a look at those issues as far as some of the zoning and other issues that we need to think about. So that's the build out. And from that, there are 2 components. There's a circulation element that includes, as you can see noted, heavy and commuter rail, which is indicated in the yellow lines going east and south and west, and also the auto, where you see the black lines. Those would be auto improvements or new roadways that we're anticipating on those streets. And here we go with the flash. I'll keep my hand away from it. And then we have streetcar, which is a red dash, and then some bicycle pieces to this. So I won't get into a lot of detail because we'll get into that as we move through the presentation. There's a primary land use framework. We say primary because we're assuming most of these projects would be what is described as mixed use. So the primary vertical land use here is indicated in this diagram, as you can see illustrated. And the question we want to ask you tonight is the location of these primary land uses, and are you in agreement with that? So we start out again with the retail hotspot, generally indicated on this diagram between Orange Street and Patty. And you have it in that location. There's a commercial, and we differentiate between the difference between retail and commercial, in that retail is a sale of goods. It's your bakers, bakeries, your clothing stores, those sorts of uses. And commercials are the sales of services. So it could be a real estate office and those sort of sale of goods also. So a slight differentiation, but we try to be very restrictive and prescriptive when we talk about retail. The next piece of this has to do with creating centers for jobs, and you can see those indicated here, the 3 major ones: St. Pat's Government Center and Madison Employment District. And then the areas where we see housing occurring, some of it long-term. For example, the rail yard, we know it's a viable working rail yard, but it's in a sense a placeholder to say over time that would redevelop. What would be appropriate use in that area? And then we have the Riverfront Triangle, West Broadway, which reflects some of your previous planning efforts, the mill site, and there's some variation in colors dealing with density. The darker the color, the higher density. There's also a notion about, again, this vertical mixed use in those areas where you see that golden color, the yellowish light yellow. We're suggesting that those would be a site-by-site, not district, but an opportunity or infill or adaptive reuse of some of your existing buildings. We've looked at parking. We have to say flat out, when we looked at every one of these parcels, everything parks out. I know some of your current code does not require parking within the development, but we think as a practice, we've identified all development with the appropriate amount of parking that would be needed to support that development. We've also looked at some of the arts and cultural. You see your existing and proposed. Your new open space systems, complementing your existing greenways along the riverfront and Caras Park and the like, and making some adjustments we'll talk about, and some new uses also. And so that makes up the land use framework, the whole array of those uses. When we did that, we were able then to assess what that would be at build out. And these are maybe abstract numbers for some of you, but I can say that it is fairly consistent with your previous growth projections. Maybe not exactly, but we think it's still in the ballpark of what was anticipated for your downtown in previous, for example, your transportation plan. So the next question has to deal with retail specifically. The Macy's anchor and Patty garage structure. So you remember, those are key components when we came back, we heard last time, to creating a healthy retail corridor. So we start with the retail hotspot, again, indicated where we've got the yellow line from Broadway down towards the waterfront and over to Orange to Patty. And that diagram looks something like this. The important pieces are those areas indicated with yellow text. So specifically, the new retail anchor is anticipated to be as large as 620 spaces. We see that new retail indicated with the reddish color and existing by the candy stripe color. So you see the two numbers there, 220,000 and 280,000 square feet that we anticipate within that area. And we see Macy's, again, as the primary retail anchor. The existing building expanded. And here's a before and after image of the site. So you see some of those uses around Macy's, including the First Interstate Bank and a parking garage and possible hotel. So here's a view looking south to north of what that might look like. The top on Main Street, 139 East Main Street mixed-use project, the Macy's where you see the A, the half-constructed First Interstate Bank office building, and some new retail, all complemented by the Patty parking structure on the lower right-hand corner. So looking at that in plan again, here are all those uses that I described. Apologize about this. And here is that was a ground floor, and here's what that might look on an upper floor. So you've got ground floor active uses along the streets, and then above it you'd have parking structure. Also within the retail hotspot, we're suggesting a second anchor at the intersection of Orange and Main Street, where you see that A on the lower corner. And here it is today. And it's to do that, we're suggesting that Front Street would now tee in to Main, where you see that little dog leg. It would give us the ability to get a larger footprint and a larger floor plate to support that retail anchor. And looking south to north again, up towards Orange Street, you see that area. ground floor retail on these buildings, which is indicated by red. A plan view of those uses and also some of the retail that would be in the riverfront triangle area. So we're seeing 28,000 square feet for that retail anchor on 2 floors. So we've got the second floor again with the parking structure on the north side. And possibility of housing above that 2-story retail. Okay. Next has to deal with open space, and there are 3 components of those. The first piece of it has to deal with the festival waterfront concept. So we look at that as the area indicated by the yellow outline, extending from generally Orange Street over to Kiwanis Park towards Adams and Jefferson, the streets to the other edge of Kiwanis Park. And the first piece of that has to deal with adjustments to Caras Park. Here's a aerial perspective concept looking south to north. The idea here is to generally is to try to capture some of the existing parking lot and convert that into park space. We've got a concept drawn here, but it certainly would need some additional refinement. The amount of paved area as opposed to green area, for example, it might change as you refine the scheme. So here's the expanded Caras Park, losing maybe a couple hundred spaces, but still maintaining at least 100 or more spaces within this area. And it might be a place for functions such as fairs, where you see the tents and things along it. It might be places for smaller concerts, or in the interim, it might be just open green space for informal recreation activities. That parking that we would lose, we would hope it would be, and we're planning it for it to be replaced where you see the green arrow. That's generally located at the existing drive-through bank facility for First Interstate. We'd also like to see better connection from Higgins Street, where we see the green arrows, and that would look something like this, looking from the south towards the north, a series of ramps and stairways. So as you came by the Wilma, you'd have the opportunity to go down a stairway where you see the 2 towers, take a ramp, maybe walk halfway down and take another stairway. Here it is looking at a side view towards the northeast. The waterfront is in the foreground. You can't quite see the water, but we're over the river. And here it is looking from the east towards the west. You see the Wilma in the background. A double sets of ramps on both sides of the bridge connecting to your waterfront trail. And that would be the first component of an overall idea of connecting back into the neighborhoods where you see the green arrows. Up Patty, to the east towards Ryman, and then over towards Clay at minimum. And some additional connections over towards the library, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So those ideas is extend some green fingers into the downtown so you have a better interaction and connection to the riverfront. We're also suggesting providing a continuous waterfront trail. As you know today, it has fits and starts, and we'd like to see that amended and improved. And we're also suggesting a festival waterfront concept that includes a new cultural district expansion where you see that darker green arrow connecting up towards the library. And this is what it looks like in perspective again. We'll talk about this as the notion of it might be a sculptural park. Depot Square on the north end of Higgins, up by the train station, indicated here. There's the proposal is to remove the old Missoula building, in some infill development north of the Artcraft building, redevelopment of that, and a large area of mostly hardscape, looking south to north, reuse of some of the existing buildings, turn those into cafes. A significant piece of this is also providing a connection to the other side of the tracks. a little bit close-up view of what this might be. A large area that is usable and can be interchangeable over time, so that's why we're proposing the paved area. The connection under the train tracks is illustrated here. Wide and airy and good sight lines. Active uses fronting onto that. Gracious steps. Get a sense of what you're connecting on the other side is a green space, an open space, a park, a neighborhood park. And looking from the underpass here, again, light and airy, wide and comfortable, high enough for pedestrians, but not intended for automobile traffic. This is for peds and bikes only. And this has been done in many parts of the world. Here's an example of how that's been done in another city, with train track, by the way, going over the top of it. And here's a project that we did in Oregon. These don't need to be hostile environments. It can be, in fact, an attraction in themselves. In fact, the city of the Dalles, where we designed and built this one, is actually hold events under the interstate freeway there. Not that you're going to, but you could. And Pine Street Concepts, another open space idea. As you know, today you have a landscape median between Patty and Madison. And the idea here is to connect the green space up to the transit center and eventually even up to the hospital. So it's a great green relief. Here it is today. You've got a gap in between with a lot of pavement. You've got the transit center. And the idea here is to take that same dimension and continue it all the way through to the hospital. This would require some changes to the parking configuration. Today's angled parking to enable us to do this would require change that angle to parallel parking. So it would be a slight loss of parking, but the sense is maybe this is an opportunity for additional green. Might be some other uses. It might be partially paved. There might be some other community assets, art and other things that might go in that greenway. The next component is housing, starting with the triangle concept. I think it's a dynamite housing site, as we talked about before. Here's a detail of that, where you see largely the orange buildings fronting on towards the river. High-density housing, some additional new streets, and some green space. A vital and an important piece of creating a desirable housing neighborhood, and also a hotel that you see indicated on the corner of Orange and Front. All of these having active ground floor uses, so they would have retail or commercial ground floor component, and higher and possibly even bigger buildings. We know that height is a sensitive issue. We'd like to make sure that we can put it where it has the least impact on existing residential neighborhoods, so you don't have buildings looming over from you. And we try to balance this and say, where are the good opportunities where it would be highly desirable from a living standpoint. And this is where we're suggesting maybe bigger buildings along the waterfront. It would be perforated so that they wouldn't be monolithic. There would be a series of streets and connections to the waterfront, highly pedestrian oriented. And the plan might look something like this. Ground floor retail, housing, some commercial, all the housing above it, and the hotel meeting space, and office for the block north of Front. The West Broadway concept, building off on your previous planning efforts, what we've done is looked at each of the possible short-term or even midterm redevelopment sites where you see the colors, and suggested some specific uses for those areas. And a key part of this is a transportation element at the intersection of Toole and California and Broadway is a roundabout that will help deal with some of the traffic issues there, confusing traffic movements, and also an opportunity to establish a gateway. And is an opportunity for great gateway art and other things that I know that you're looking at right now as part of some of your planning and other planning efforts in town. So you see medium and high density housing. The next component is employment. The government center We all have been in agreement that it's important to keep the county facilities in the downtown. And the proposal is to do a combined city and county facility, which is illustrated here, north of the transit center and the county courthouse. There would be a couple of floors of housing and parking integrated in the basement, and also a new parking structure on the south side of Alder Street, about 2 blocks away, where it was indicated in brown. And finally, we've got a question about the cultural visitor district. This one has changed a bit from the last time we came in and had the discussion with you. And this is largely as a result of a lot of the comments we had in our meetings and also from the comment sheets. So what we did know is that there was support for a cultural district, but you're a little bit lukewarm about the configuration. So what this is identifying is a new reorganization of the district that has more of a water orientation. One of the key components for his consideration of building this long-term has to deal with some of the contributing historic buildings that are indicated by the black squares. And for this to move forward, we require the relocation of those buildings to those areas where you see the yellow squares on the right side of that sculptural garden park. So, but it's not an essential first phase piece, and we say until those issues as far as historic buildings are resolved, that lower part along the waterfront really should be considered as a phase 2 project. Okay? So what would be in that cultural district? We see an opportunity for a shared University of Montana museum, the Performing Arts Center, and a conference center. A lot of synergies that can take advantage of the possible new parking structure, its adjacency to the retail hotspot, and the waterfront and the greenway system. And so those are the uses that are suggested. We've looked at some of the previous programmatic issues as far as possible sites for the museum, for the performing arts, and the conference center, and we believe it will all fit into this area. Okay? So looking at it in 3 dimension from south to north again, here's what that would look like. A sense of that. And the sculptural garden could be very serious, or it could be as playful as some of these sorts of elements. I think all of that would be determined at a later date. Okay, so I'm going to pass this on to George, and he's going to talk a little bit about circulation elements. Thank you.
We're going to run a little test here. We've got the projector we're using over on Jason's side has some color distortion in it. So we're going to put another projector up here, and Jason's going to see how quickly he can do this. So it's a chance for a little comic relief, I think. We'll just watch and see how he does here. The colors are extremely important on these graphics simply because we use the colors to differentiate between different uses, and so if the colors tend to be a little bit muddy or move together, it's certainly harder to communicate. And as I was standing in the back of the room, I could tell that the screen on the far left was easier to understand than the one on the right. And so we thought we'd try out a new projector, even though we're getting this this kind of on and off performance. I'm taking the circulation framework piece simply because we are going to start off by one of the things we're going to talk about is certainly bicycles in your downtown. And we're also going to talk about very quickly about sustainability. I'm often asked about sustainability and what that means. And of course it means different things to different people. And so we're trying to be very specific tonight. We've done a lot of work in the area. We kind of know what produces results and what doesn't, and so we're going to be making a suggestion tonight that we think has the potential to save considerable amount of energy in your community. And so, Jason, give me a high sign when you're ready, and we'll get going. So I think it's all but up there, and Jason is making the final adjustments. But in the circulation framework, of course, there's a commuter and heavy rail, that's the yellow. There is the bicycle system, basically your off-street or protected bike system where you see the green. There is a streetcar where the red dash line is indicated. And the idea is that all of these work together and to allow people to move through town and around town conveniently over time as you grow. The auto system then is summarized here. There are some improved streets where you see the black. We talked about the new two-way streets on Front and on Main. And this little comment down at the very bottom, backing angled parking down in the hip strip simply because there would be bikes on those streets and it's safer for bikes when you do that. Transit would be, we're showing the streetcar, the red line, and it would go from employment center to employment center. Your existing employment center then on the west at the hospital down through the retail hotspot through the center of town and over to your new employment center on the east, and eventually then on down to the university. That commuter and heavy rail, we assume that sometimes energy costs keep going up, that you will, as many communities are experiencing, a renewed interest in commuter rail and a desire to implement. And so we see commuter rail coming on into town on the north at the station and running then to the south. And also, so you get an east-west and a south movement. Your existing bus lines are shown here as well. And so all of that is part of that circulation framework. The bikes are shown here, the off-street trail loop and the protected bikeway then in blue. And we have some existing and planned bike routes in yellow. The idea here is that there's a complete connected system that's understandable, that is not discontinuous. And so coming back then to this topic, sustainability, and we've looked at conservation choices in all the different sectors. We have an understanding of how energy is used, and in our U.S. economy it looks something like this: commercial, residential, transportation, and industrial. That's how we use energy in those four different sectors. So what can you actually save in these sectors? And this would be new uses only. We're only talking about new stuff here at this point. Well, under commercial, you can have stricter conservation standards than the codes require today. It's the same in residential, and you can also locally then have some high-density housing, more high-density housing because it's more energy efficient. You have common walls and common floors and ceilings. Transportation has there are many possibilities. Improved transit service is huge, of course. Protected bike paths, which we'll talk about. Employment next to high-density housing reduces then trip length or even the need to make an auto trip. Neighborhood grocery stores, that's a high trip generator, and if you have them in your neighborhoods, you travel less and maybe you walk, who knows. Compact development is, in the end, reduces trip lengths. And in the industrial sector, you can attract energy efficient industries, look for new industries that are energy efficient, so you do not have high energy consumers in your region, which may in the end put you at risk. So, and you can reuse waste heat. So what can you actually do in Missoula? Well, you can, this is typically a state responsibility, getting stricter codes, as is it in the residential sector and as it is in the industrial sector. However, you have a lot of local control over what you do as far as land use and circulation. And we're suggesting that might be the most productive area for you to look at immediately and over the longer term. The thing that has the greatest potential is protected bike paths. And the reason I say that is when we look at statistics, we see that in the United States today, and this is the average, bikes and walking are about 4%, other modes is 96%. Well, that other mode basically would be the auto. Your community, you probably have a 6 or 7% bike of your trips in the region or in your downtown area on bikes today. So you're about as high as you can get in this country. In our community, we're about 7%, and we're about maxed out with a system we have. And the reason we're about maxed out is that we have on-street bike lanes. And most of us aren't comfortable riding in those lanes for safety reasons. Now, you get a certain percentage of the population who is, and they do very well, and they're very skilled, and they can compete with the auto if you give them this advantage of the bike lanes. But we're looking at the other 97% of the population who might ride if it was safe. The conflict, the reason you have the safety conflict, certainly big vehicles really don't mix with the public, and even in bike lanes you have trucks pulling into them, you have cars disrupting bike lanes, and in many cases it's hard for big trucks to see bikes, and you need these kinds of warnings. And so you see these kinds of signs sometimes, which is really unfortunate, and these are the kinds of things that show up in cities. All unfortunate. Now, we can then look at other countries for some guidance. In the Netherlands, there are two university towns, one Utrecht and the other one Wageningen, and at 33,000 people. Utrecht has 288,000. So we were interested in how they did it and why they had this kind of bike ridership. Now, a lot of research has been done, and this comes out of that research. And you can see how many walking trips. The big number here, I think, is in the other category. 40% of some sense or other, that's transit and auto. So, in fact, they have a small percentage, almost a third to a quarter of the auto use that we do, because they have other options. And so, a couple of weeks ago, I spent 3 days in the Netherlands, Utrecht. I said, we can't bring this to you without having a better sense of how these things work. And so I worked it into something else I was doing. And I rode the systems. And the reason they work is they have protected bike lanes. They are off the street. Now, MIST, your Missoula Institute for Sustainability, has addressed this. They are, as they should be, skeptical of the protected bike lanes, but this comes from their website and their policy statement. Cyclists should be next to pedestrians, not cast into traffic to deal with inattentive drivers opening car doors and sporadic parking maneuvers. And we all know that. I mean, that's just common sense, but there it is. So when we look at these great bike systems, they have these characteristics. You see here, spatially, the communities are fairly dense, fairly compact, and the terrain is flat. Now, your terrain is flat, and so I was interested in the density that you would find, and I found that here we are in Utrecht, that pretty low density out in the suburban areas. Here are the protected systems off the road. In town, the density was a little higher, but not all that much higher than what you have here. As far as the weather, obviously it's a big issue. Rain and temperature are the two things, and you find that in the Netherlands they get a lot of rain, and there you are. They just put up an umbrella and away they go. The weather is not as severe as your weather, but you have many days, of course, in a year when I understand you ride. Competition for other modes and auto availability is always an issue. In other words, how convenient is it for you to drive an auto, and are there other transit modes? And that might reduce bicycle use, but in fact, in those situations, and this happens to be in Utrecht again, an exclusive busway, and they also have streetcars or light rail, you find that they still get the high bicycle use. This is the big one, policy. All of the places that have high bicycle use around the world have a bike plan. It's not an accident. There is a very specific, deliberate bike plan that is adopted. Safety is always the big concern, and public support. These things don't happen without public support. The public has to believe that this is a good thing and they want it so decision makers can move ahead. But safety is the big issue in the bike plans. And they are safe because there is not a mix of the auto and the bicycle. They're not competing for space. The signalization is always very clear. Wherever the bike path crosses an intersection, the bike path stays up. The cars come up and over. They are clearly marked so the car understands that they are going into a bike-sensitive, pedestrian-sensitive zone. Here's another example of an intersection with some kids riding through it. The idea is that there is no disruption in that bike system. It is really the priority. Signalization is always clear. Traffic signal on the right. a bike signal on the left, bike signal on the right. You can see that you may be able to see that little green bike up there, or this kind of a signal is pretty common as well. There's a bike signal, stop. Here's a go signal and a stop signal. And so who rides then? And I was interested in who would be riding the system given that kind of usage, and what about the population and the age, and who is it? Well, we found that everyone was riding. The handicapped were using the trails. There were mothers with their children. There were families. There were kids on bikes. There were all kinds of different bike vehicles. The one, of course, carrying packages and kids and groceries. And that kind of adaptation was very interesting to see. And we find that in this country, people are making those kinds of bike vehicles today. Just a minute, we'll get this back. Our computer's getting excited here. I'm not doing that. It's doing it. And let me see. I blacked out here, but let me see. I'll go back and see what happens. Very interesting. So we'll just have to bear with us for a moment, and we'll see whether we can get this set here. And here we go. I think we're back again. Whoop, we were for a minute. And we'll move on to the next one. And there are a couple of women on a bike. You often find there are two people riding a bicycle. Someone on the back and someone in front. And so you see this is very common, and this is very common. And you find that all ages are riding the bicycles as well. And this one was kind of interesting. You see the woman in the high-heeled shoes waiting. She was riding on the back of the bike that she's up against, and there was a signal. The bike stopped, and if you're riding in the back, you need to get off because of balance. In this case, then the signal turned. The other woman got on the bike, started to ride. The woman in the high heels started to run, caught up then to the back of the bike, made a leap, and there she is. Yeah. And so it's really it's interesting to see the adaptations. Anyway, and then are there income groups that are riding here aside from this social mix? Are there income group? Well, you find all kinds of businessmen riding around town, and it's really pretty common. And then for those who don't want to ride, you can catch a bike taxi. And so the numbers are what they are, and it comes down to these protected bike systems. And we're suggesting that you consider this system, so there are two options on your response sheet. One is that you go to a protected system, and the other one is that you keep the bike lanes on the street. And specifically, we're talking about Higgins Avenue and Broadway, where we'd have the protected bike lanes, and Don is going to take you through those. So Don, good luck with the computer.
I'm almost worried to grab my computer so it doesn't hop on us here. So starting with Higgins, the bikeway system here with the map again, that would the protected system extends all the way from 4th Street on the south and the hip strip all the way up to the square. And on Broadway, it would go from California Street all the way over to Van Buren. There's a proposal of this extension of this protected system. So starting with Higgins Avenue. So here's the two options. On the left is the protected bike lanes, and on the right is the standard bike lanes. I'm not touching anything. So if it doesn't go, I'll grab my computer. So really, again, as George described it, the protected bike lanes are on the back side of the parking, on-street parking. There is a 3-foot walkway, so as you get out of your car, you've got a zone, and then you've got the standard sidewalk. So what does that look like? Again, area for auto parking, even bike parking is a good location. I know that's an issue here in town, that you've got such good bike use that you need to deal with on-street bike parking also. So that's a close-up of that, give you a sense of that. One of the other advantages of doing the protected bikeway is that it also narrows the perceived crossing distance for pedestrians at intersections. So that is an advantage. We're talking about what we describe as tabled intersections at the intersection. So George talked about having to go up and over. We would anticipate that at the intersections for any new constructions or reconstructions of the streets, and also at alleys. That's the other sort of issue point. To make the priority the pedestrians and the bicycles, so as they cut through or pass through these zones, they have a certain awareness that they're on equal footing with pedestrians and not dominant with their couple thousand-pound vehicles. And we needed these sort of overt actions to make sure that that happens as part of that. So part of the question is will this fit? So on the top you see the existing right-of-way, and your sidewalks are probably the primary issue. So do they get narrower? The illustration that we're describing here is for a 3-lane section. From a transportation system, WGM and Brent Campbell have taken a look at it. There's been your previous Downtown Streets project that did a lot of analysis. It appears to work. And so we're suggesting that this would be the concept. Yeah. George is saying the orange and the blue. The orange is the sidewalks, and the blue is the bikeway. So as you take a look at that. So there is a slight narrowing of the sidewalks going from 14 down to 14 and 16 feet in some instances, but we think we haven't passed the threshold where that is too narrow. And in fact, when you look at the distance between moving traffic and the park traffic, it actually increases from instances of 18 to 16 feet up to 22 feet. So we got a little bit more separation, and the key is the execution of how this would be designed in the end. The other option is, and we would support it as a minimum, is to do a standard bike lane. You do need bike facilities into your downtown. And we think that if you don't do the protective bike lane, you need to do this sort of system. So we've got a little bit more extra room on this, and we know issues that are described as dooring happens where cars open doors and bicyclists run into those. So what we suggested, if you do a standard bike lane, do them a little bit wider. So we're saying it's an 8-foot lane. We would do the same sort of treatments at intersections with tabled intersections. At alleys, again, we would want to put a prioritization for the pedestrian and cyclists. So those would be designed accordingly. And here's what that section would look like again. About the same width of the sidewalks, the wider on-street bike lanes, and indicated in blue and yellow there. So that gives you a sense of what that would look like. Again, we're illustrating a 3-lane option. If we were to go to 4 lanes, would mean a slightly narrower sidewalk, but we think it would work if you had to do that. So it is not dependent on doing a 3-lane. We just think it works better if we do a 3-lane. The question always comes up with the protected bike lanes. Does this preclude anybody on a bicycle from riding in the street? And we say no, it doesn't. This is pretty typical. The guys that we describe as the Lycra guys, the guys who are serious cyclists, are more than welcome in the system to still riding in the street. So if you're experienced, you want to have a higher speed on your bicycle, you certainly still can ride in the street rather than being on maybe the lower speed protected bike lanes. Another issue has to deal with Higgins Avenue Bridge and how would this work. It is to a degree a choke point today. It's not a terribly safe and welcoming connection down to the hip strip and down towards the neighborhoods and the university. So what can we do? So essentially what we're showing here is the protected bike lanes separated by a curb, and the little points are bollards, essentially a system of providing a visual and physical separation between the 2 lanes. Higgins in this area would be a 2-lane, very wide roadway for those. The bridge itself wouldn't change from edge to edge. It's currently 66 feet. The idea is to expand the pedestrian and the bike zone from about 5 feet for peds today and 5 feet for bikes to about 15 feet. So we've got 9 feet for pedestrian along the bridge. We know there's a strong desire for more of a strolling environment on the bridge. It offers you a great opportunity for viewing. And also the ideas that we previously showed with the ramping coming down to the park would play in well to this idea increasing additional area for the pedestrian. So those are the two options for that. And then the standard is very similar. It's just you're in the street rather than on the sidewalk, essentially, with that. So the same dimensions, just a slightly different treatment of the surface, and it's a relationship to the traffic lane. Down in the hip strip, the question is, how do you then transition further to the south? We know the proposal is to run these protected bike lanes or the standard bike lanes at least down to 4th Street, and then at that point we would make a transition to either your existing or planned bike lanes on 4th Street that feed into the neighborhood east-west, and also a connection at a realigned intersection of 3rd Street down to the waterfront. So you see at the top, currently you don't have that movement at a T intersection at 3rd. We think this helps provide better pedestrian access, provides you an opportunity for maybe a mini plaza, if you will, at that intersection, and simplifies the bike turning movements. We would hope we could warrant a traffic signal also in this location, if possible. Okay, and so what would that look on the south side when we go into the proposed protected bike lanes? You see it illustrated here today. It's 12-foot sidewalks. We wouldn't narrow those sidewalks. We would maintain all the existing on-street parking, and then just add again the bike lane and that transition sidewalk between the parking and the bike lane, the 3-foot piece. So as you can see how it fits in there. The standard bike lanes is illustrated here. Again, we don't have the luxury of as much space on the north side, so instead of that big wide 8-foot lane, we'd go down to a 6-foot bike lane. It's still adequate, and we think that would still work also. So it's very similar. And here's that section, again, keeping the wide sidewalks, the on-street parking, and the bike lanes. And so the next piece of it has to do with Broadway. And if you remember last time, we talked about a two-directional, on one side, bicycle facility for both Broadway and Higgins. We're maintaining that two-directional piece on Broadway. Part of the rationale is that, as you know, east of Orange Street, there is a limited amount of right-of-way. Actually, I guess it's beyond Orange Street. It's about, what's the street, Jason? It's McCormick, where it ties into the Riverfront Park. You're constrained for space. And so there's actually a point there where your Riverfront Trail blends into this. So the idea is to be seamless and keep the two-directional trail and continue that all the way over to Van Buren and connect at that location here on the south side of the street. There's some advantages of doing that simply because there are less curb cuts, there's less interactions, and frankly, it's probably the more common approach in other cities around the world where they do protected bike lanes. Here's an example in Spain, how that's been done, where you get to the point where you've got congestions on the bike streets, and people are obviously using the bike systems in those areas. So this drawing's a little bit tweaked. The north is to the right. Broadway is going up and down, so you get to see how that's done. So you get two directional. It's a little bit wider. It's 10 feet wide instead of 5 feet. And there would be a stripe in the middle of it, and there would be the same sort of traffic signals for automobiles and bicycles as part of that system, the tabled intersections. Again, as I mentioned, all on the south side. The existing right-of-way is generally about 98 feet through your downtown to Orange, and between Orange and Van Buren, and it's illustrated here. So the idea here is that you would require some narrowing of your sidewalks down to about 12 feet from 16 to get this bike lane on the side. So it does impact that a little bit, but we haven't hit that point where we think it's significant in the pedestrian environment. If it was 10 or 8, we'd really be worried about it, but 12, we still feel pretty comfortable about that. You get street trees and street furniture and benches and other things like that, and it's still very viable. The standard bikeway would be, again, planned with the lanes on street 5 feet Not 6 or 8, they get a little bit narrower here simply because of your constraint in roadway capacity. And like the protected bike lanes, the sidewalks would be required to be narrowed from 18 feet down to 14. So they're a little bit wider, but not significantly wider, 2 feet wider if you do the standard bike lane. If you were to go to 6, it would be actually an equal rather than the 5. So a little jumpy again here. So that's the bike piece. So we spent a considerable amount of time on that because it was an issue that we had a lot of conversation and a lot of comments from you too. So from a pedestrian and bike, we'd like to see some connections on the riverfront. And as you know, there are some disconnections on that. So you see the yellow pieces that are illustrated here. We'd like to see those gaps filled in. So I think you're all aware of that. We would require some sort of land acquisition or easement that would be required to come through these areas. Some of these areas may be more difficult than others. The first step is to get it as part of an adopted plan and to make sure that there is a concept for it. Some of the areas in particular are illustrated here over by the Madison Street Bridge connecting over towards Van Buren, by the hotel. We'd like to see some improvements to the neighborhoods. You've already got bike crossings on some of your streets, integrating the north to the south side along railroad tracks, and some of the other planned areas that you've already been having some discussions. We want to make sure that those are thought about and connected as part of the downtown plan. And along some of your major access streets. So for example, on Madison, here's some home, now he's Jason trying to make his way up the hill, and he's hiking. We need a better access point there, and here is it looking at it on the other side of the street. We'd also like to see a new river crossing across the MRL line along that railway. You guys have been pretty good at doing these sorts of river crossings. Here's your next challenge, I think, to do that and connect to the south side here. And then we've got implementation, and I'm going to hand it back to George.
We're just about finished, but we're often asked, well, how do you move ahead? And with the plan, where do you get the money? And that's really the next phase we're going to take a look at, but we can give you a little preview here. In other words, you can't do everything all at once. You try and pick the half dozen projects that are most important, the ones that you can implement in a hurry that will create momentum. And frankly, what we've done is looked at all the sites. We have designs for all of those sites. We know what could be built on them, but we've singled out a few as being, as we say, catalysts and time sensitive. They're catalysts because if you do these, it causes then or stimulate other private investment. And for example, down where you see that little 31 or the bottom yellow arrow, that's the Patty parking structure, which would serve your retail hotspot and Macy's. And then the other arrow has to do with the Macy's rehab and expansion. So the retention of the department store in the downtown is extremely important as far as maintaining healthy retail in your downtown over time, and providing retail parking for retail customers in a retail-friendly parking structure is also extremely important. A time-sensitive project then would be the new facilities for the county, the integration of the county and city facilities up where you see that upper yellow arrow. And then over to the left, you have an RFP out for a hotel on the Triangle site, and so that is time sensitive as well. We think that if you concentrate on these, you will create momentum and other good things will happen. And so if the last thing then is a special design district, and certainly we've created it's not totally arbitrary, but we've said you've got districts in your downtown area, and this can certainly be refined, and many of these contain important historical traditional neighborhoods, and these are some of the issues in those neighborhoods, and you can read those. And so how do you maintain historic character when you have all this wonderful historic fabric in your community and you're getting some new buildings in? in fact, which may not be compatible or all that compatible with what you already have. The solution then, we're saying, is new downtown zoning districts in those areas that are very clear about permitted uses and that also have design standards for new development, that you create design guidelines for those districts. You have fundamental design guidelines for the whole downtown which define your value system and what you'd like to see, and then district design guidelines, because not every area is identical, and some then have some rather unique features that need to be protected. And then finally, you need to formalize, or we need to make some suggestions about how you can formalize that review process. You already have a planning board. They would look at uses, standards, and regulations, and your design review board then that would deal with design guidelines, and we'd make some suggestions about how that process then should work. So here we are. We've finished the presentation. You've been extremely patient. We're ready for about 5 minutes of questions, and then table discussions and table reports. And so we'll open it up for questions. I think table discussions will cut down to about 20 minutes. We'll give you a time on that. What we're going to do is run the questions on a loop slideshow so you can refer to the questions during your table discussions. But for the moment, we're open for questions. And so raise your hand. The lights are going on, and we have a hand in the back. Yes, sir. Is there another mic we can take around so that...
Should be one on your podium there if you buy a water bottle.
Okay. We'd like you to use that. Give us your name and to state your question so that everyone can hear.
I'm Alex Taft. Did you consider extending the trolley to the east to Van Buren so it would be closer to the heavy rail, so you could have the heavy rail to trolley connection, and then closer to the university so you could have the trolley and then walk across the Van Buren Street Bridge into the university?
It should extend to the university eventually. And so you're really looking at a first phase here. And the connection to commuter rail is important. And I think that's a refinement that we have to look at. We felt that it was pretty close to the train station and the commuter rail, so it was a couple of blocks away. So that wasn't too bad. But we share your concern about the connectivity and the convenience.
Some of the suggestions that we've had is that this is essentially a phase one project. We need to develop a build-out diagram to say what happens if you were to build it all out and connect to some of the other neighborhoods.
Thank you. Other question? We have a hand back here.
Yes, your Higgins Street dedicated bicycle pathway, does that not reduce it to one lane for cars and a third lane for left turns?
Again, the question is, are we reduced to 3 lanes?
No, on Higgins Street, your dedicated bike lanes reduce car traffic to 1 lane each way plus a left turn?
Yes, and that's what we're showing, and our traffic engineer tells us that'll work fine, but you can put 4 lanes in, and it will still work, just for your information.
Thank you.
The issue has to deal with how is the 4-lane working today, and when the analysis looked at it, essentially the middle lane of the 4-lane is a de facto turn lane. So this gives you an opportunity to formalize that as a turn lane.
Over here we have, way over here, yeah, and just whip way over there on the end, yeah.
Why did you not have lanes on both sides of Broadway? I didn't catch why was it all on one side on Broadway?
We could have it on both sides on Broadway if that was the sentiment. You should note that on your response sheet. Our feeling was that it might be easier to build it on the south side and make your connections into your other off-street system. And probably a little less costly because you're only doing it on one side of the road. But if you felt strongly that it ought to be 2 sides, let us know.
And one other question, were you aware that they're talking about making that
Yes. Yeah, talk loud and she'll eventually get there. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is about the patio parking structure, and I was just wondering how tall you propose it to be.
Right now, it's 5 floors. Thank you. Other questions? Over here, yes. Just stand up so she can see you and get the mic to you. Yeah.
With the narrowing of the sidewalks on Higgins and downtown, was motorized wheelchairs taken into consideration? Would they ride on the sidewalk?
The answer is yes. You'd have plenty of room.
You didn't hear the questions on motorized sidewalks.
Well, we'll motorize that sidewalk. Yeah. A moving sidewalk. Yeah. Okay.
My question is regarding the narrowing of the sidewalks, too. In larger cities, very often the cafes have sidewalk sitting or something like that. And while I kind of like that, I also don't like when I'm walking in those cities that there's no place for the pedestrians because the tables and chairs take up all the room. So I guess I'm just worrying about the narrowing of the sidewalks. Will that preclude then no cafe-type stuff on the sidewalk, no sidewalk cafes?
Yeah. They would narrow down to, our estimate is 14 feet, and we think that is enough room. Our retail guy is here, and he feels we're okay for outdoor seating. In our community, our sidewalks our right-of-ways are very narrow. We have 12-foot sidewalks, and we still get the outdoor seating, and so we think you're okay.
So the key is to identify those zones as we refine the plan to say we've got a through pedestrian zone at a minimum width of 4 feet, we've got a storefront viewing zone, and a sidewalk seating zone or the furniture zone. We can break that out. We're pretty comfortable with 14 feet.
Yes, other questions? Over here. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering about the commuter rail and how far you would extend that. How you hope to do it crossing the
Question being?
The commuter rail?
Yeah. The question being?
How far do you hope to extend that and where's it going to?
And the answer is someone will know more about that than we do. We've had discussions about what's been going on. So we've received some information. At this time, what we thought was you need to set up your community so if it comes on in, it's front and center, and all modes of transport are connected to it. For instance, your bus transfer station right now is very close to your depots where the streetcar would pass close by, and so we think you're set up for when it arrives. What it connects to, we're not sure at this point.
Part of the planning effort is simply to identify facilities so that some things don't come along that preclude that from happening. So a line on the map is very powerful, and it says that we dedicated this as the route for the commuter rail. And over time, we can work at the details. But we know that we want to have a route that goes somewhere towards Lolo, out towards the airport, maybe up the canyon, and that may be a heavy rail system that connects up to the Amtrak route and the White. So we want to have that fully integrated, not only a local circulator system for light rail, with the streetcar route, but the commuter rail and the heavy rail that connects you to the region and even interstate in the nation.
Other questions? Right here, yes, sir.
Could you explain your rationale for the high vertical development along the river and the lack of it along the railroad corridor?
We are suggesting that if you were to develop the rail property, it would be high. It could be high-density development.
No, not density, I'm talking about vertical height.
Vertical height, we're talking.
You seem to really exploit the verticality next to the river,
Yeah.
and yet you brought it down to, maintaining 1 and 2 stories along the railroad corridor on North Higgins. So what's the rationale?
The
railroad would actually be 5 or 6.
Yeah, do you want want to jump in on that? Because
Well, we know that probably your number one asset for getting high-density housing is where people want to live is the waterfront. So what we're suggesting there is expand the park system so it's not cheek and jowl up to the riverfront. So we get a park, and then get as much housing that's reasonable, and market rate housing, to build up and take advantage of that great resource and views and the location in the riverfront triangle. Along the railroad track, we know it's going to be a bit of a challenge to get people near railroad tracks anyway. So what we said is let's get some lower buildings to establish essentially a wall, a physical wall that's maybe 2 or 3 stories, and build the density behind that. So you get a little bit of separation from the railroad tracks, and the density happens behind that. So then you have higher buildings transition to the railroad tracks and still have the views. So that was the idea. Can it change? Sure, but that's a proposal that we've drawn. But I think that we're open for any suggestions on either of those options.
yeah, right here.
If Front Street and Main are 2 lanes each, what do you think the traffic impact might be? And I'm concerned because those 2 streets go through a residential neighborhood.
I don't, Brent, where are you? Do you want to answer this? Jump up, because my response would be that when you have the two-way traffic, you might even see less. The one-way induces high traffic speed and lots of traffic movement. When you make it two-way, you get traffic calming, you get typically less traffic through the neighborhoods. But Brent, you go ahead.
I would concur. I don't think you see major traffic volume changes. The origin destination is the same, the connection is the same. What two-way streets allow you to do is have good circulation and access to businesses that's convenient. And you actually end up with less out-of-direction travel, so the total miles traveled decreases. So I'd say it would be
Here's a kind of an interesting statistic that with one-way system, you travel about 1.5 times as far to get to where you want to go because of the outer direction. You've got to go a couple of blocks to come on back and around. And that's a general statistic. So with a two-way system, basically you're inducing fewer vehicle miles traveled in your downtown, which then translates into typically less volume on the streets. Yes, sir, back here.
Has there been any talk about making a pedestrian area between Broadway and north to the depot, that whole area, just a pedestrian wall?
On which street?
Going north from Broadway, north towards the depot?
On Higgins?
Yeah.
There hasn't been any discussion about that, but to make a pedestrian-only environment, you need very high densities in your downtown, and you really don't, at this point, have those densities. We know that when you take traffic off the street, and for instance, you have retail on that street, basically the business volume drops by 50% overnight. And we have been called in to put traffic back on streets, those in low-density areas, so that the retail can recover. If you had the density, lots of people living in the downtown, then it might make sense.
We do know that since the 90s, that in the 70s and the 80s, that was a real popular trend to go to pedestrian-only environments. Since the 90s, 90 cities around the country have removed those. We did one in Oak Park, Illinois recently, put it back traffic, and we're seeing really positive results for the retailers on those streets where they were moribund. Those businesses are now thriving as a result of adding some traffic onto the street. So it's a trend the other way.
We have a microphone back in the corner. Yes, sir.
I was hoping to hear some discussion of affordability in the housing section. Can you talk about how those strategies might integrate with the rest of the plan?
We've had lots of discussion today about affordable housing, and it's difficult. Every city wants it. It's difficult to get it. And if a city wants it, typically the city needs to find a revenue source to allow that to happen. In our community, for example, for every affordable housing unit, it requires a subsidy of $40,000 to $50,000. And so that's the reality, and you just can't legislate it. One needs to think about the funding sources, not only the funding sources, but where it might go. And we will have additional discussions about that because it's important that you have affordable housing in your community. And we're working with a number of cities on affordable housing strategies, and we'll bring that experience in. So that's the next level of detail when we talk about implementation.
So have patience for us for the next meeting, because we're going to hit that one head on.
Other questions?
I have a,
Here, yes, right here. Okay, microphone, you got a
Yeah,
mic too. You have the
this is not a, is it on?
It's on.
This is not a question, but in response to the question about having higher buildings over by the railroad, as this town grows, I think it's really important to be able to look up and see the hills that don't have anything on them. And I would hate to see really high buildings there if we couldn't see the hills behind them.
Yeah, we've had discussions over the last couple of days about view sheds and view corridors, and we'll be also talking about that in the next meeting because we share your concerns. Up here, yes. Yeah.
The protected bicycle pathways stop at 3rd Street and 4th Street, and 3 more blocks down is the high school, and I know we're talking phase 1 here. I'm just wondering why we stopped and why the high school isn't seen as some long-term potential sustainability with so many access to young people.
I apologize for not giving you the full description of that. The rationale is that there's not enough room. So what we've identified is what we call a bike boulevard or a parallel route. So a block off of each side of Higgins from using 4th and 5th, where you've got bike lanes or planned bike lanes, to make that connection, and then use traffic calming elements and other signage to indicate a priority for bicycles on those streets. And there are things called sharrows. We can do other elements to make that really a mixed shared street condition connecting to the high school.
And those streets would be Myrtle and
Back over here, yeah.
I'm wondering, and this is the first planning meeting I've been to, has two-wheeled vehicle parking been addressed? In other words, when you look at your projections for parking needs, are you looking at primarily four-wheeled motorized vehicles, or are you also looking at parking for two-wheel vehicles, which I understand a lot of cities are looking at now?
You know, the interesting thing is, just before we made the presentation night, we're going through it, trying to shorten it out, and we had this whole bike parking plan in, and we said, oh, that's too much detail. We've got to shorten this thing. So you're right, and we have suggestions about where that should occur and how much should occur.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Motorcycle, Harley, scooter,
Right.
motorized.
Exactly. So we heard that comment today for motorcycles and scooters. We need that also.
Okay. And then we'll we have another one over here, and then let's have the discussion, and we'll come around and answer your questions individually if you raise your hand. Yes.
I was wondering, I realize you're talking about phase one where there isn't the density, but the goal is to increase density in downtown Missoula. But the only anchor buildings you have are retail, and to my knowledge, there's only one large shopping grocery store in that area. And if you increase the density, but you don't have a requirement that at least in phase two, that there be another large grocery option, preferably in one that provides organic food, in my opinion.
Tom is going to come up here and talk about the grocery store, which is a subject near and dear to our heart. So,
you're absolutely right. And the incremental growth that's proposed and the number of households and the number of new employees downtown would support additional grocery space. We had identified a second anchor location down at the Triangle, the base of the Triangle on Broadway, where the street's somewhat reconfigured. The floor plate area of that's around 28,000 square feet. The retail could go two-story to 56,000 square feet. Is that right? I do economics, but I can't do math in my head, so you have to bear with me. One of the things we had talked about within the team is, well, what kind of retail could go in? And to me, 28,000 feet, 25,000 feet, which has adjacent parking, which is highly walkable, which is bikeable, would be a great location for something like a Trader Joe's which began in California, a lot of store brand, a lot of organic, a lot of more specialty grocery items. You'd still need to go to a Safeway or another grocery store for big, Costco, for big paper items and all that stuff. But for neighborhood serving and resident serving stuff, that size grocery store is ideal. There's another chain in the East Coast called Fresh Market that I like very much that does 25,000 feet, very much like Trader Joe's in product mix, but twice as good looking. It's a beautiful store. It's like a better version of Whole Foods, but small. And they seek out urban locations. So one of the uses we thought about that could fit very well there would be a downtown grocery. It also could lend itself to other kinds of retail, and we'll be talking about that at the next meeting, but that would be a good fit.
One more question, and then let's have your discussion. Maybe there are no more. Is that it? I think. Whoop, one over back here. One more, and then we'll go around.
Yeah, I'm curious what the height level you see the tallest buildings downtown being.
We have no opinion about that other than to say there's some sites that are more suited for development than others. And we are concerned about view corridors. We're concerned about changing the character of your community. And when we come on back to you, we will have some suggestions about that as well. So we need to hear from you and on your response sheet if you have some thoughts about it.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is when we talked about the next steps as far as some recommendations, I know you're going through a code rewrite process right now, but part of this is not a one-size-fits-all approach where you've got a CBD zoning and you can apply the same height throughout or whatever that district might be. We're saying that there might be a need for some spot taller buildings, but we certainly don't want to see that throughout the downtown study area. Certain areas, in fact, we want to limit the heights of those areas, in fact. So some of those proposals will come back and have a little bit more discussion with you after we have a little bit more time to absorb what you think about these proposals.
So here we are at 8:15, and in 20 minutes we're going to be calling on you for table reports. And so we'll give you a couple of minute warning. What we would like you to do is fill out, in this period of time, to fill out your response sheets, talk to your neighbors about the possibilities, and we're going to start running them on the screen right now. And we look forward to a summary from your table to give us a sense of the flavor of the discussion. And Jason will record those comments at 25 to 9. And fill out your response sheets. We do that? Okay, and hand it to the... May we have a volunteer for a table report?
Hello?
Tom
Hello?
is going to bring or Jason's going to bring the microphone around to the table.
And is this working?
Or someone else is going to bring it around to a table. If you would raise your hand, do we have a volunteer from a table? Anyone? Right over here. Oh, I'm sure you're volunteering. No. Pardon?
Discuss.
All we want to know is we would like you to tell us what the flavor of the discussion at the table, what the sense of this is, what you like or don't like, or what you think we should have done differently. You can say anything. because probably anything was said at the table. So just give us a quick summary.
Okay, I'll give you a quick summary. We're all very positive about what you've done, and can I not? Oh, I can't hear. You can't hear me. Okay, okay. Stand up. I need to stand up. Okay. I think we're all very positive about what you've done, and I think the only conflict that we came up with at the table was the bike lane on Broadway. If you're going, west, say, and the traffic's coming at you, sometimes that's a bit of a conflict in terms of the biker and the car. Just how you see that. It just is a mental kind of a thing, like you should be going with the traffic, not against the traffic. I mean, we've kind of all learned that.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Another volunteer. Anyone. And you can hit, your table can pass if you want, but we usually find that your table won't be heard. Yes.
We were in agreement with basically everything, with the exception of the cultural district. We talked about possibly during the second phase doing more of a reconstruction and an extension of this building, the one we're in, incorporating possibly a convention center here and a redesign that goes along with the design you had in the plan. Also, we talked about how the Macy's anchor and the parking structure is a really good foundation for starting the process. During the process, zoning will probably be a really important thing, just to let it evolve over time so we can maybe avoid major roadblocks during the process. And we also all agreed that tall buildings in the right places are a good idea.
Thank you.
Our table was pretty happy about most of the things we saw in here, especially the protected bike lanes. One of the concerns with a few people was the cultural center and how it could displace some of the housing and personal property that's there right now. So it could also, that area could also become good use for residential condos, et cetera.
Thank you.
Hi. Overall, we were very supportive and very impressed with what was presented tonight. We didn't make it through the whole list, but I'll tell you the things that we were really impressed with. One of those was the linkage of the trail system along the west side of Higgins there, and we thought that was crucial, and we were very happy to see that become a focus. We also like the idea of kind of the green space fingering up into the neighborhoods. We thought that was nice. The Pine Street extension of the boulevard concept, we really like that. We thought that added a lot aesthetically, and we really didn't lose anything by carrying that over into the transfer center. One of the things that we wanted to make sure of was we really think that parking obviously is key. We support the proposed parking structures. We wanted to make sure that there was retail on the floor level, and we understand that is what's projected. So we think that that's really great. There was a little bit of concern about losing some of the parking in the Karis Park area, but with enough of the other parking structures in place, hopefully that would balance out. We love the idea of the improvements to the Higgins Street Bridge. That really should be someplace where people feel comfortable stopping and pausing and looking and taking in, one of our biggest assets downtown, which is the river and the view. And right now it doesn't feel that way. So having those ramps and that expansion there, it was really nice. And being able to see the continuation from one end of Karis Park over and under to the other end was very nice. We also really strongly support anything that can be done to keep the government structure downtown. We feel it's absolutely crucial that those services remain downtown, and so we highly supported that. We like the way that they rerouted Front Street to tie in with Main. It opened up some more retail space and made for a nice smooth transition. Overall, we all really like the protected bike lanes. I was the only stickler with a couple of financial questions, but we really like the enhanced safety features and feel that would make it much more usable for cars and bikes and pedestrians altogether. And was there anything else? I think that was it. Basically, we were very impressed.
Okay, so our table couldn't decide on anything. No. No, that is true. So we also really liked your plan.
It's your plan.
Your plan. I, as an owner of Dana Gallery, have one major concern, and that is that we really put some effort into doing on the north side of downtown, because right now it feels like, as a retailer on Higgins and Broadway, that everything gets siphoned into Karis Park. So I think it's really important that we do something in terms of a square or something that's more in the middle of downtown. And we're a little concerned that if there's a focus on retail on Orange Street and Broadway, that again siphons off traffic from downtown. So we encourage some circulation downtown, I guess. We love the government staying downtown. We like the bike lanes. Yeah, good job.
I think that it was agreement here also that it was that there's a lot of exciting concepts, but there was two things that we wanted to add to these concepts. One of them was more of an artist colony space instead of a cultural space that's more museum-like. We're talking more small artist colony space. I don't quite know. I've seen it in other communities, but I don't know how to explain it particularly. But the other thing that we were really interested in is making sure that we're looking at space that are small rental units that are more the single bedroom type rental units, and lots of them, so that you get a lot more people downtown than just the giant condo, expensive condo kind of thing. So those were the only two ideas we wanted to add. Thanks.
It's beautiful. Nice work. Our table split up into two groups, and so I don't know if Lori will want to say anything, but Kim and I had a lot of discussion about the cultural center as well, and neither of us feel that, even though it's not being addressed as a convention center necessarily, and there was some typeface on the screen, the parking could still be a major issue. I think a cultural center, I like the idea that Nancy just brought up of maybe some kind of an artist quality space or co-op. If there is a focus to still try and build another facility to hold single venue events, I think it could be risky at this time. I personally would love to see that be something different, and so we talked about that space maybe not being so singularly focused, and looking outside of downtown, and perhaps not thinking of downtown as the single focus to have every single event. And so we talked about that at length.
You know, I'm good. She's good. Okay.
Thank you. Another volunteer. Raise your hand to the table back there.
Yeah, our table primarily focused on the issue of the protected bike lanes, and we were all in favor of those, and we were just worried that they would take away from the width of the pedestrian walking area, and if there was any idea of leaving some space for pedestrians, but also making a separate bike lane from the flow of automobile traffic. That's pretty much all we had. Yeah.
Thank you. Couple of things. I think if we're going to have the protected bike lanes and we're going to reduce the area available for automotive traffic, they ought to be mandatory. You can't drive your car on the sidewalk. You ought not to be able to drive your bicycle away from the lanes that are provided for bicycles. There's some concern here about the cost and difficulty of negotiating all the private property that would be required the multitude of parcels and the cost of the parcels to do lots of the things that we want to do here, including the cultural center and the parking structures and all that kind of thing. And then there's some concern about the use of so much of the riverfront triangle for a relatively few people who would be residents in that in those buildings, when there was an original purpose by the grantor of that property that it be for public purposes. I think that was it.
Thank you.
This is just my own idea, and it comes on my comment sheet, but in response to the issue that was raised about giving more space to pedestrians, I was thinking that making 12 and 13 foot wide vehicular lanes in the downtown area is too wide, that encourages more speed than we need downtown. So if we narrowed those down to 11 feet, we could give that space to the pedestrians.
Thank you. Great to hear that.
I did hear that.
Another volunteer, another table here. Have we heard from everyone? Over here? You don't have to have a report. Minority reports. Okay. You can have a minority report of one if you want. We'll entertain those.
Just a clarification on the lane width. We kind of do the worst case scenario, you know, and the sidewalks vary downtown, believe it or not. So we do show some wide lanes. The intent would be to go to 10 and 11 foot lanes and give as much width to the sidewalk as we could. In some cases that would mean we wouldn't have to narrow the sidewalks, but we wanted to show the worst case that we would probably in some spots potentially have to do that.
Thank you.
On the special design districts, I think those are a great idea if we have the follow through to where the design district is thoroughly thought through area by area, and it's developed so that when it gets implemented into the zoning reflects that, and the procedures for design guidelines are thought out well enough that they are administered with a fair amount of certainty, so it doesn't, as a developer, you aren't into this routine that we're in now where it's a 2-year process to get a project done for any project at all. And so if we do that, they need to be developed so that they're understandable and administered in a way that there's some certainty that you're going to get through it if you follow the guidelines.
Thank you.
Will that Higgins Street Bridge be one lane? And if you put a stoplight, you're talking about at Third, will traffic back up on the bridge? And is that bridge
We would have
safe?
a left turn pocket at Third Street that would back up a ways over the bridge and provide left turning further northbound, and so we'd have a taper running on the bridge. But we really only need 2 lanes on the bridge if we're going to have a 3-lane system since the least time.
Okay,
And
so-
we would add one again at Front Street as we came off the bridge.
Okay, so you wouldn't expect traffic piled up on the bridge there, stop?
Not too much.
Okay, thank you.
One last comment. I've totally lost everyone at my table, and we didn't cover much ground, so I'll just kind of wing it here. The one point that I would raise, and that is I'm not entirely convinced of the configuration of the streetcar system for Phase 1 as it currently stands. I love the concept of a streetcar system at some point coming into play, but I wonder if in the spirit of a bold vision, we ought to think about a more significant connection from downtown to a place like the airport as part of an initial phase. I worry that as it's now designed, it might become more of a novelty as opposed to a truly vital and vibrant transit mode. So just something to consider.
Thank you. Anyone else? Back here, yes.
I'm just going to stick my foot in on this one, but I really think that the biggest issue for making our town a bike-friendly town is to get some of the big semis and logging trucks off of our streets, because they're trying to navigate 4th Street, 3rd Street, Brook Street, and these streets were never designed for vehicles of that size. So I would really love to see that issue addressed, because as a bicyclist, that's the biggest issue for me, is trying to navigate these streets up against these big cars or trucks. Plus also the one-ways, streets such as 5th and 6th going towards the university are like, they're like cars go like bats out of hell, because there's nothing to constrain them. So I'm really in favor of 2 lanes, 2 directional streets on that corner. So I really think that those, as a bicyclist, those are 2 of the biggest issues I have with making this truly a bike-friendly town, although I applaud all the other efforts. So, thank you.
I'd like to second what Suzette just said, and maybe we can think about doing some kind of truck depot, since the interstate is right there, where the biggest trucks would offload into smaller vehicles, even electric vehicles, all sorts of smaller vehicles. That way we could reduce the turning radiuses and slow down the traffic and make the downtown feel a lot more comfortable. Even look at delivery times that wouldn't be in the peak hours. Some of those slides you showed in Europe are really nice, and we could probably adopt some of the other things other than the protected bikeways that you showed, using some of their examples, even some bike stations throughout town, and make it very people-friendly. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before we close the meeting? Linda, would you like to come on up? But before you do, I want to thank everyone for coming on out on this evening and giving us your time and giving us your comments, your thoughts, and your response sheet. Thank you so much.
I think they deserve a round of applause, don't they? I think they've worked really hard over the course of the summer. If you remember when they were here in May, we were talking about them coming back in late July or August, and they said, you know, it might need to be September. We have a lot of work to do. So I think we've consumed their summer, and thank you so much for the work that you've done. I think we've got overwhelming positive support for a lot of the concepts that were presented tonight. And, you know, on behalf of Crandall Arambula, the Downtown Business Improvement District, the Missoula Parking Commission, the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, the Missoula Downtown Association, and there are a lot of organizations that are really working to improve our downtown. We thank you for being here tonight and your commitment to this process. We think the next round of meetings will be in November. We're debating on the weeks, maybe 3rd week, maybe 2nd, we're not sure. Be sure to fill out your ballots if you haven't already done so. Leave them with Deidre or Julie or Susie at the back door, and stay engaged in the process. MissoulaDowntownBID.org. This PowerPoint presentation and ballot sheet will be on that website by Tuesday of next week. We hope. And again, thank you and good night.